At the dinner table, my father's voice sliced through the laughter. "We believe it's better if you distance yourself from us." Every head turned my way. My siblings smirked. My mother lowered her gaze. The floor felt like it shifted beneath me. I didn't argue. I simply rose, nodded once, and walked out. What they didn't realize was that the car waiting outside wasn't just a ride. It was the doorway to a life they could never dream of. And when they saw me again, I wouldn't be walking through their door. I'd be stepping off my own private jet. The dining room was alive with chatter and clinking glasses when Zina heard her father's voice cut through the noise. He looked directly at her and declared she should step aside from family matters. For a moment, the air froze. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. No one at the table came to her defense. Her mother dropped her eyes, refusing to acknowledge the pain written on her face. Her siblings shifted uncomfortably, some snickering, others hiding their amusement. The sharpest blow came from Fola, her father's favorite son. He leaned back smugly, eyes gleaming with triumph. Everyone in the room knew what that moment meant. From then on, Zina was cut out. Fola would inherit everything: the estate, the business, the family's respect. Zina sat motionless as her father's words echoed in her mind. She had always pushed herself, always worked harder than anyone, always tried to prove she was worthy. Yet this was how they saw her: disposable, unwanted. She longed to ask why, to demand answers, but her throat tightened. All she could see was Fola's victorious grin, his expression declaring he had won a battle she never even agreed to fight. He didn't bother to hide his joy. To him, this was his crowning moment. Her heart splintered, but her face stayed calm. She scanned the table, memorizing each reaction. Her mother silent, her siblings entertained, her father resolute, and Fola basking in pride. They expected her to crumble, to cry, to plead for her place. But she refused to give them that satisfaction. Quietly, she lowered her gaze, set her napkin on the table, and stood. The room fell silent. All eyes followed her, but no one called her back. They had made their decision, and she understood it clearly. As she walked out of the dining hall, her chest felt heavy, yet deep inside, a flame had been lit. They thought they had erased her from the family that night. What they didn't realize was that this moment was the spark that would change her life forever. Outside, the world was waiting. And one day soon, she would return, not as the girl they dismissed, but as a woman they could never ignore. Zina stood still for a moment, her father's words weighing on her like a stone. Everyone expected her to push back, to defend herself, or at least ask why she was being cast aside. But she did none of that. She stayed silent, her face calm even as her heart pounded. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Her family mistook that silence for surrender. They believed she had finally accepted her place as the unwanted child. Her mother stole one fleeting glance at her before staring back at her plate, unwilling to be part of the scene. Her siblings traded glances, some smirking, others whispering. And Fola, chest puffed and face glowing with victory, believed he had crushed her spirit completely. To him, her silence was proof of defeat. But Zina wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She was gathering herself, holding in a storm they couldn't see. She knew that begging would feed their pride. She knew shouting would only let them dismiss her as emotional and unworthy. So she chose the most powerful response of all: silence. Slowly, she pushed her chair back and rose. Every pair of eyes followed her, waiting for words that never came. She picked up her small clutch, lifted her chin, and walked to the door. The room stayed still. No one tried to stop her. To them, she was leaving in shame. But Zina's mind was crystal clear. As she walked away, her thoughts weren't about what she had lost, but what she was about to build. She promised herself she would return, not to seek love or approval, but to prove they had cast aside someone far greater than they imagined. Her quiet exit wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. The family returned to their food, laughing again as if nothing had happened. They believed she was gone for good. What they didn't realize was that her silence spoke louder than their words. It was the silence of strength, of determination, of a woman already planning her rise. As Zina stepped away from that table, memories flooded her mind. Every one of them a reminder of how different her life had always been from Fola's. Since childhood, the double standards were obvious. When Fola wanted something, the family rushed to provide it. He was their pride, their golden boy. But when Zina asked for help, she was told to wait, to work harder, to prove herself. She remembered school days when Fola failed tests but was still praised for his effort, while her own top grades earned no applause, only the cold remark, "That's what we expect from you." When Fola asked for money for outings or hobbies, her parents gave it without hesitation. But when Zina requested something as simple as books, she was told the family couldn't afford it. So she saved her lunch money, sacrificed, and learned to make do. As they grew older, the gap widened. Fola squandered money on parties, cars, and reckless living. Each time he slipped up, his parents covered for him, excusing it as youthful mistakes. But when Zina worked small jobs to support herself, her efforts were brushed aside as insignificant. She even paid her own school fees at times, and sometimes sent money home when bills piled up. No one thanked her. They treated her sacrifices as obligations. She recalled long nights spent working extra shifts, exhausted but determined to make sure her family had enough. And she remembered mornings when Fola stumbled and drunk, always excused with laughter. It was always her sacrifices against his rewards, her discipline against his freedom, her silence against his glory. Now seated in the back of the car after leaving the dinner, those memories didn't weaken her. They sharpened her. She finally understood. She had always been the backbone. Even if they never admitted it, her family had raised her to be invisible while Fola shone. But what they couldn't see was that her resilience had forged a strength Fola would never possess. The same double standards that once crushed her were now the fire driving her toward a future they couldn't fathom. While her family thought she was powerless, Zina had been quietly building a life beyond their imagination. Years before that dinner, she had stepped into the world of aviation and luxury logistics. At first, it was just a job, her way of earning money without relying on anyone. But Zina paid attention. She watched how the wealthy traveled, how deals were sealed in private lounges and aboard private jets. She spoke little but absorbed everything. Every detail became a stepping stone in her secret journey. She began as an assistant, arranging schedules and managing luggage for high-profile clients. But she treated every client with respect, earning trust at every turn. Soon people began to notice her. CEOs, diplomats, entertainers, and powerful investors, individuals living in worlds her family couldn't even imagine, started to view Zina as more than just an employee. To them, she was dependable, discreet, and remarkably efficient. What began as casual conversations gradually evolved into lasting relationships, and those relationships soon opened doors to opportunities. Rather than squandering her income on flashy luxuries, Zina chose to invest carefully and quietly. She listened to the wisdom of those she encountered, studied market shifts, and placed her money into rising ventures, technology firms, renewable energy, even modest stakes in aviation companies. She never bragged, never shared her strategy, not even with her closest companions. Every investment was like a hidden seed, buried where no one could see, waiting patiently for the right season to flourish. Her family believed she lived modestly, barely scraping by on her own. In their minds, her salary was small, her apartment plain, her days uneventful. They never asked, never cared enough to know otherwise. And Zina never corrected them. She let them think she was invisible. Yet, in silence, she was mastering the language of influence. She was flying to cities they had never visited, meeting people whose names carried weight across continents. By the time her father told her to walk away, Zina had already built something far more valuable than the family estate. She had woven a network that spanned borders, anchored in loyalty, trust, and opportunity. Business leaders sought her counsel. Investors relied on her insight. Aviation firms considered her a partner, not a subordinate. While her family assumed she left in defeat, Zina was actually stepping into a world they could never reach. What they dismissed as weakness had become her greatest strength. She had built her empire in silence. And soon, both her family and the world would see how high she had risen. Months after Zina's quiet departure, the flawless picture of her family's life began to crumble. The grand estate, once a symbol of pride, grew heavy with problems they could no longer hide. Bills piled up, and the endless flow of money was slipping through their hands. The walls of the mansion remained polished, the cars still lined the driveway, but behind closed doors, fear was tightening its grip. Fa, who had always lived a life of excess, was at the center of their downfall. He burned through money recklessly, lavish parties, flashy cars, and endless displays of wealth he didn't know how to sustain. Whenever his parents tried to intervene, he brushed them off with an arrogant grin. But reality has limits, and his carelessness drained their fortune faster than it could be replenished. Even the banks began closing in. At first, the family tried to mask their troubles. They quietly sold assets, a parcel of land here, a car there, hoping no one would notice. But the debts only grew deeper. The more they sold, the worse it became. Neighbors who once admired them whispered behind their backs. Business allies who once respected them began to distance themselves. Their once proud family name was now tainted with decline. Fall grew desperate. Instead of slowing down, he gambled recklessly, clinging to the hope of a miraculous win. But each loss only dragged them further down. His parents, once convinced he was their future, turned against each other in daily arguments, blaming one another for placing too much faith in him. Zena's father, who had forced her out, now spent sleepless nights staring at failing numbers. The estate was no longer filled with laughter. Its halls echoed with silence, punctuated by tension. Servants were dismissed, luxuries cut back, but even those sacrifices couldn't save them. Their empire was collapsing under its own weight. The irony was cruel. They had cast Zena aside, convinced she was unworthy. Yet, without her quiet strength and discipline, they were falling apart. The very life they once used to belittle her was now slipping through their own grasp. For the first time, they tasted the bitter struggle of survival without the daughter they had rejected. Meanwhile, whispers about Zena began to spread like wildfire. At first, it was harmless gossip. Someone had spotted her in an airport lounge, dressed sharply, speaking confidently with important-looking figures. Another claimed to have seen her step out of a black car in Dubai, surrounded by business associates. Slowly, the whispers grew louder, crossing borders, reaching ears that had long forgotten her existence. It became clear Zena was no longer operating quietly behind the curtain. She was flying on private jets, walking into boardrooms with top executives, and shaping industries with her decisions. In elite circles, her name carried quiet respect. Clients who once overlooked her now recognized her as a force of influence, a bridge between worlds. Her contacts weren't just wealthy, they were leaders, innovators, and decision-makers across the globe. Back home, her family couldn't escape the rumors. At social gatherings, neighbors whispered in corners, wondering if the stories were true. Old acquaintances dropped hints, asking questions with thinly veiled curiosity. Some boldly declared, "Your daughter is doing extraordinary things abroad," only to be met with strained smiles and hurried denials. Her parents refused to accept it. To them, it was unthinkable. How could the daughter they had dismissed be respected worldwide? Fa scoffed at the rumors, insisting they were lies. He told anyone who asked that Zena was probably just a secretary or assistant, nothing more. He claimed she owed her success to luck or to the men around her. His arrogance blinded him to reality. Yet, deep inside, a seed of fear began to grow. Because every new rumor carried more weight, and each story painted Zena as someone far beyond their imagination. The family tried to deny it, but the whispers followed them everywhere. The more they dismissed her, the more others believed. Their reputation, once untouchable, was now overshadowed by the daughter they had scorned. The very daughter the world was beginning to celebrate. Every rumor was a shadow cast on their pride, reminding them of the night they told her to leave. And while they struggled to hold their world together, Zena's name was rising to heights their money and status could never reach. Then came the night of the family's grand event, a desperate attempt to prove they were still powerful. Guests in elegant attire filled the hall, music swelled, and Fa walked proudly among them, pretending nothing had changed. The family spent what little they had left to uphold appearances, clinging to the illusion of influence. But the evening's spotlight wasn't theirs. It belonged to the daughter they had abandoned. Far above the city, a sleek private jet cut across the night sky. Inside, Zena sat poised, calm and resolute. This was more than a visit. It was her declaration. For months she had stayed silent, letting rumors swirl, letting her family doubt. But now, it was time to reveal the truth with their own eyes. As the jet touched down, word spread quickly of an unexpected arrival. At first, no one believed it could be her. But when the doors opened and Xena stepped out, elegant, confident, and commanding, every whisper dissolved into stunned silence. Cameras flashed, airport staff froze in awe. Her arrival wasn't just impressive, it was unforgettable. Polished black cars rolled up to the gathering, drawing every eye with the growl of their engines. Guests inside turned toward the sound, curiosity sparking through the room. The doors swung open, and Xena entered. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone shifted the air. Conversations stopped, heads swiveled, and even strangers sensed the authority she carried. Her family froze. Her mother's eyes widened in disbelief, unable to process the return of the daughter she had once ignored. Her father's composure faltered, cracks forming beneath his pride. Fola, who had always met her with smug disdain, now stood hollow-eyed, his arrogance slipping into shock. The sister they dismissed, the child they cast away, suddenly commanded the room's every gaze. Influential leaders and dignitaries, invited as guests of her family, didn't rush to greet Fola or his parents. Instead, they crossed the room to Xena, shaking her hand warmly, addressing her with admiration. In that instant, the balance of power turned. She was no longer the forgotten shadow in their story, she was the star. Her return wasn't vengeful or loud. It was calm, graceful, yet powerful enough to leave her family stunned. She hadn't come seeking their validation, but to show them what leaving had given her. The freedom to rise far beyond their reach. The moment she stepped fully inside, the mood shifted. The laughter and chatter stilled, as if the space itself adjusted to her presence. She didn't boast, didn't hurry. She moved with quiet assurance, and that alone drew every eye. Within minutes, people gathered around her, not from curiosity, but from respect. The first to greet her were industry leaders her family had chased for years. They passed Fola and his parents without a glance, heading straight for Xena, smiling as they shook her hand, some even embracing her like an old ally. Soon government officials joined, their words filled with admiration, as if they had waited for this moment to meet her. To the guests it was clear, Xena wasn't just a visitor. She was a force whose influence reached beyond borders. Her family stood frozen, watching the truth unfold. The father who once dismissed her now felt his chest tighten. For years he believed Fola would uphold the family name. But the truth stood before him. Xena had succeeded in ways he could never touch. Her mother, who once avoided her eyes at the dinner table, now looked away again, this time out of shame. And Fola clenched his jaw as the people he had spent years chasing looked right past him. Guests whispered, pointing not at the hosts, but at Xena. They marveled at her composure, her connections, the ease with which she stood among the powerful. Each handshake, each smile aimed at her was like a spotlight exposing her family's greatest mistake. They had discarded the one who had risen above them all. The power in the hall shifted completely. This was no longer her family's event, it was hers. Without effort, she had claimed the stage and everyone knew it. The pride her father once carried, the arrogance Fola once flaunted, all of it crumbled in silence as they watched Xena move with ease among leaders and decision-makers. At last, they saw her clearly. She was not the daughter they had brushed aside, not the sister meant to remain invisible. She was a woman thriving in a world far beyond their grasp, and nothing they did could ever drag her back. The evening continued with music and laughter, but for her family, the weight grew heavier. They had watched the daughter they ignored earn the respect of leaders, investors, and officials. Every handshake she received reminded them of how far she had risen without their support. Her father tried to keep his composure, but inside he was unraveling. Debt threatened to consume him. The estate was collapsing, and the son he trusted had proven reckless. For the first time, he realized that Xena might be their only chance at survival. Later, as dinner quieted the crowd, he approached her privately. Each step carried the tension of a man torn between pride and desperation. Once he had spoken to her with cold authority. Now his voice trembled as he called her name. Xena turned, her calm gaze meeting his. He looked at her as a drowning man looks at shore. Quietly, he confessed. The estate was nearly gone, debts had multiplied, creditors circled like vultures. Even the family name no longer carried weight. For the first time, he admitted Fola had failed them. With shame heavy in his voice, he asked his daughter for help. Zina listened without interruption. She stood tall, her expression unreadable, though her mind replayed every wound from the night they cast her aside. Her father's harsh words, her siblings' mocking grins, her mother's silence. That night, they had discarded her as worthless. And now he stood before her as though she were their only hope. Her father waited, expecting the eager daughter who once sought their approval to bend quickly. But Zina's silence was no longer weakness. It was strength. She let the pause weigh heavy, forcing him to feel the choice he had made. For the first time, he saw the vast distance between them. She was no longer the girl begging for acceptance. She was the woman holding the power to shape their fate. The request had been spoken, but the answer withheld. And in that pause he understood the truth. Zina had stepped away, and in doing so, had soared far beyond their reach. Zina's eyes moved from her father, to her mother, and finally to Fola. She read the shock, confusion, and regret etched across their faces. Every dismissal, every smirk, every cruel word flashed in her memory. She had walked away in silence, and now returned stronger than they could imagine. Her smile was calm, but it carried the weight of victory, one they could never strip away. "You told me to step away," she said, her voice firm and steady. "So I did. I stepped into a life you'll never control." Her eyes gleamed, not with anger, but with pride. Then she added, "My wings no longer need your approval." The room fell silent. Guests who had already seen her influence now watched as her family felt the crushing weight of their own choices. Her father lowered his gaze, her mother's hand shook faintly, and Fola, once smug and untouchable, stood paralyzed, speechless. Every word she spoke cut through years of neglect. And in that moment, they understood. The girl they underestimated was gone. In her place stood a woman unstoppable. Zina turned with deliberate grace. Each step radiated confidence. Outside, her sleek black jet waited, engines alive with power. She walked past the silent crowd, past the family that once tried to confine her, toward a future only she could define. Every step was a declaration. She was free, independent, and fully in command. At the jet, she glanced back one last time. Her smile lingered, calm and triumphant. The engines roared, filling the air with vibration. A signal that she was moving forward, leaving the past behind. Her family could only watch, powerless, as the jet lifted into the night sky, carrying her far beyond their reach. The message was unmistakable. Zina had not returned for revenge, nor for acceptance. She had come for herself. And as the lights of her jet disappeared into the dark, her family finally understood. The life they once tried to control had slipped from their hands forever.